Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to the session of Meezan lecture series. In this series, we are studying Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi's book Meezan, and we have studied quite a lot of this book. For the moment, we are studying one of the preambles of his book, which is called Fundamental Principles. In this preamble, Ustaz Ghamidi has shown how he views the whole uh, structure of the Quran, and in lieu of the fact that the source of religion is the Prophet himself, therefore the Quran and the Sunnah have originated from the Prophet himself, and of course, as a result of the enterprise of the Sahaba, these literature also came into being. So then he goes on to expound principles of understanding the Quran, determining the Sunnah, and also understanding the Hadith. So we are studying all these three separately. And for the moment, we have started off with the principles of understanding the Quran. And if you see from the slide that is being viewed before you, we were studying the fourth of these principles, which is the final authority. We have already studied appreciation of classical Arabic, eloquence of language, and uniqueness of style, in which we have seen how the Quran has a very unique structure and language. It is not the same as the one which is uh, uh, taught and read today in Arabia. At the same time, the Quran style, if it can be compared to anything close to any human endeavor, is like it's a book of dialogue, it's a book of conversation, it's like a sermon being delivered, and then, of course, embedded in narrative, this conversation takes place between real characters of 7th century Arabia, and hence all these statutes require some very special characteristics that have to be kept in mind while studying the Quran. In our last session, we had started to study the final authority of the Quran, and we had seen how the Quran itself calls itself as the Furqan and Meezan, which means it is the distinguisher of good and evil. It is the scale in which good and evil has to be weighed, and it will actually give its verdict regarding what is right and wrong regarding religion. It is also Muhaymin, which means that it is a guardian over previous scriptures, and therefore previous scriptures have to be studied in the light of the Quran, and in case of any difference of opinion or difference of point of view, then the opinion of the Quran will prevail. We had seen in our last session also that even if the Quran is regarded to be the final authority, then there are four very serious questions which do arise on this idea. First of all, is the fact that we find that there are variant readings of the Quran which are found and read not only in Hadith literature but also in our fiqh books and also in our tafsir books. And these variant readings, at times, they significantly change the meaning of the Quran also. So if this is so, then how can the Quran be regarded as the final authority? The second question we will be discussing also once we finish this, the response to this first question would be that people, or the group of people who say that the Quran is not univocal and what it conveys through its words is not definitive. The third aspect is regarding the issue of muhkam and mutashabih verses, about which there are people who think that they cannot be fully identified, and the meaning of the mutashabih verses being known only to God. This also undermines the authority of the Quran as the final authority itself. And finally, we had also surmised that there are certain narratives, so certain in fact, very prominent narratives which seem to go against the Quran. And if this is so, then should the Quran prevail over them, or they have a different view to tell, and how is this reconciliation possible, if at all? So we will be discussing all these four questions in order. But as I said, we had started to discuss the first of these questions, which means that the Quran has variant readings, and these variant readings, of course, would then give us this impression that the Quran can be read variously. But we had seen that the verdict of the Quran regarding the collection of the Quran is that the Quran will be collected and then consigned to the Ummah in the lifetime of the Prophet, and the reading that was then in vogue after this final collection was called the Al-Arza Al-Akhira, that was presented, and the reading itself was called Al-Qira'atul Amma. And this Al-Qira'atul Amma is the reading that was in vogue in the times of the rightly guided caliphate, and we have seen how all our authorities of the of the time of the Prophet would have vouched for the fact that yes, this is the only reading that has been that is admissible, and it is the sole reading that has the status of perpetual concurrence, which is also called tawatur. But he had also seen that there is a narrative of 7 ahruf, which seems to say that the Quran could be read variously and differently. And we saw in that narrative that Umar ibn Khattab and Hisham bin Hakim bin Hizam actually had gone to the Prophet once Umar had heard Hisham bin Hakim reading Surah Furqan in a different way from the one that he had in mind. And when both of them went there, and the Prophet asked both of them to recite it, and both of them recited differently. And very strangely, the Prophet actually ratified both readings and saying that the Quran has been revealed like the one Hisham has in his mind, and also like the one which Umar has in mind, of course, referring to Surah Furqan. And then he said that in Hazal Quran, Unzil Quran ala sabati ahruf, faqrabu ma tayassara minhu, that the Quran has been revealed on 7 ahruf, and you can read on any one that is easier for you to do so. So we had just read this narrative, and we are now about to critically evaluate this narrative as has been put forth by Ustad Ghamidi. So the first critique that he has presented is that though this narrative has been recorded in the basic books of Hadith literature, no one in history has ever been able to offer a convincing explanation of it, rendering it totally ambiguous. In fact, he has actually cited a Suyuti, and has said that Suyuti himself, after recording several interpretations of this narrative and then later on acknowledging the untenability of each of these interpretations, has confessed that this narrative should be regarded among the mutashabihat, whose meaning is only known to God. So that is, of course, something which gives a very odd look to this narrative, that there is no one who has ever presented a convincing explanation of this narrative. And Suyuti himself, a polymath, has said that the best interpretation to him is that it is amongst the mutashabihat, which means that only God knows its meaning. Secondly, Ustad Ghamidi surmises that the only plausible interpretation of the word ahruf is that it connotes pronunciation of words that the Arabs were used to. But in this case, Ustad Ghamidi says the text of the hadith itself negates this meaning, because it is known that both Umar anhu and Hisham anhu belonged to the same tribe, the Quraysh. So obviously people of the same tribe could not have had different pronunciations. They belong to the same tribe, and if the only plausible interpretation is that the difference in this reading was not in the words, or they were not different words, but the words were the same, but the manner of pronunciation, of course, or the lahja was different. This is the only plausible explanation, Ustad Ghamidi says. But then he says that if this plausible, or the most plausible of explanations, is accepted, it still does not hold good in the case of this narrative, because, I mean, the same tribe would not have different pronunciations. People belong to the same tribe would have the same pronunciation. So Umar and Hisham both belong to the Quraysh, and how could they have differed in pronunciation? The third critique which has been presented by Ustaz Ghamidi is that even if it is accepted that this difference was of pronunciation between various tribes, and as a result they were allowed to read it in their own lahja, in their own dialect, the verb unzila is very inappropriate, because the word of course means was revealed. So the Quran has specified that it was revealed in the language of the Prophet's tribe, which was the Quraysh. That is the Quran saying so in Surah Maryam, and Surah and other instances, also in Surah Dukhan also. So after this, it can be accepted that the various tribes were allowed to read it according to their own accents. But how can this be accepted that the Almighty Himself revealed the various dialects and pronunciations? So remember, it says that the Quran has been revealed on 7 ahruf. So it could not have been the fact that these pronunciations have been revealed by God, because God revealed the Quran in the dialect of the Quraysh. So the word unzila, which is found in this narrative, which means was revealed from God. So because you see, this difference in pronunciation could not have been revealed by God. It was something that happened on the part of human beings. So they differed in this pronunciation, not that God Himself revealed different pronunciations. So he says that this third critique is that the word unzila should not have been there, because this gives the impression that the Almighty Himself read the Quran in different languages, in different dialects, which of course is not true, because He Himself has said in the Quran that it has been revealed in the dialect of the Quraysh, which of course has one pronunciation. Fourthly, the fourth critique which is presented by Ustaz Ghamidi is that he says that it is known that Hisham accepted Islam in the 8th Hijri, which is on the day, in fact, when Mecca was conquered. Now, if this hadith is accepted, he says that it would mean that even after the conquest of Mecca, I mean, until that time, which is a good, almost we can say, 18 or 19 years of the Prophet's ministry, even a close associate like Umar was unaware of the fact that the Prophet had secretly taught the Quran in some different form and reading from the one openly heard from him and preserved in memory and writing. So every person can realize how grave this claim is and how far-reaching its consequences are. That you think that the Quran was being revealed, and on the one hand, there was one openly known reading of Surah Furqan, for example, but then he also secretly taught a companion like Hisham in a different way to read the same surah. And of course, this would mean that if this is so, that different readings were being read, and the Prophet never even divulged that, then this is, of course, going to cast serious aspersions on the whole process. So, same is the case, Ustaz Ghamidi says, which is which is of the sort of the fact that the narrative which record the collection of the Quran in the times of Caliph Abu Bakr and Umar, anhu, and which actually give this impression that the Quran was arranged and of course collected and arranged after the Prophet had passed away. And of course, at this instance, we are not going to study these narratives, the text of the narratives, but a very brief summary of these narratives is that in the times of Abu Bakr, when there was the Battle of Yamama, it is said that many Hufaz, memorizers were martyred, and as a result of which Abu Bakr feared that the Quran might be lost because these memorizers are being killed. So he called in Umar for the council, and Umar said that how can we do something which the Prophet never did, but ultimately got convinced. And then they called Zayd ibn Sabit for this task, and he too presented the same conundrum. He said that how can we do something which the Prophet has not done? And then again, he ultimately got convinced, and then he started to collect the Quran from various fragments. And then it is also said that he was not able to find the particular verse of Surah Tawbah at this time, and he could only find it with one particular person. So this is how the Quran was collected. But in the times of Caliph Usman, it is said when readings or differences in reading arose when Huzaifa ibn Yaman had visited the front of Azerbaijan and Armenia, where Muslims were fighting against the Syrian and the Kufan armies were fighting with Armenia and Azerbaijan. He noticed that the armies were reading the Quran differently, so he came back to Caliph Usman, and he said that, well, if this is the case, then he called for the manuscript that was written in the times of Caliph Abu Bakr, and then it had been consigned to Umar and later to his daughter Hafsa. So he asked Hafsa to give him that manuscript so that he could have the copies made, and it is said that the copies were made and distributed into various parts of the empire, and a committee was also constituted to write this down. And in case of any difference, the dialect of the Quraysh had to be preferred. Similar narratives say, or a narrative on the side says that on this occasion another verse of the Quran was found missing, and this time it was a verse from Surah Ahzab. So these are the two narratives. I've just given you the gist of it, about which Ustaz Ghamidi says that how can they be believed when they give this picture that the Quran was actually collected after the Prophet. The Quran itself specifies, and we have studied that verse in our previous session, Inna alayna jam'ahu wa Qur'ana, which means that God says that I, or we in fact, we are going to collect this Quran and then have it compiled and arranged and consigned to the Ummah. So these, of course, narratives give an entirely different picture, which is not only against the Quran, but also they are against common sense. So Ustaz Ghamidi says that in the 6 canonical books, the Sihah Sitta, these narratives are primarily recorded on the authority of Ibn Shihab Zuhri, Authorities of Rijal regard him to be guilty of tadlis and idraj. These are two technical terms. Besides these, if some other facts of his personality are as referred to by Imam Lays ibn Sa'd in his letter to Imam Malik are kept in mind, none of the narratives reported by him regarding such important issues as this stand acceptable. So the narrative that he cites in this regard is something that we will see, and also see how this narrative has been presented. And at the same time, we will be considering the fact that the Quran was actually collected, as the Quran itself says, in the times of the Prophet himself. But regarding Ibn Shihab Zuhri, Ustaz Ghamidi actually cites the Tarikh of Yahya ibn Ma'in, and he says that and this is what we have information regarding Ibn Shihab in this manner, and when we would meet Ibn Shihab, there would arise a difference of opinion in many issues. When any one of us would ask him in writing about some issue, he, in spite of being so learned, would give three different answers, each of which would negate the other, and he would not even be aware of what he had already said. It is because of this that I have left him something which you did not. So this is something which is quite alarming, and we can see that this letter of Imam Lays ibn Sa'd to Imam Malik, in which he says that I actually forsook him, I abandoned him because of the fact that he would give three different opinions, and none of these opinions would match. In fact, they would negate one another about the same issue. And so he says that I abandoned him, by Imam Malik did not do so. And then he goes on to say that as far as the text itself is concerned of these variant readings, then we have to understand that this is an absolute truth, that the Quran has just one reading, and only one which is found in our codices. And this is the same as the Qira'atul Amma. It has been wrongly dubbed as the Qira'atul Hafs, but as far as the Quran is concerned, it has just one reading. And besides this, the reading which are found in the commentaries, like our exegesis, or are read and taught in our schools of religious instruction, or seminaries, or are even currency in certain areas, are the remnants of those malignant campaigns from which no religious discipline of the Muslims has unfortunately remained protected. So he says that these readings may have arisen from the insistence of some on the reading of which the Quran was revealed before the Al-Arda al-Khira, and from the forgetfulness of the narrator. But later, owing to the same motives which led to the fabrication hadith, they became so rampant at the end of the Umayyad dynasty that several of them had come to prominence. So basically, Ustaz Ghamidi says that there seems to be three reasons for the origin of these variant readings, and the most likely of them was that because the Quran was rearranged in a new sequence, and of course the previous sequence was abandoned, it was forsaken, and at the same time, of course, some verses might have been either abrogated or changed in structure. So in this final reading that was supposed to be the reading that the Ummah had to adopt, it may well have been the case that some people did insist that they will not leave the reading which was the historical reading, the chronological reading in which the Quran was revealed. Remember, there was a revealed reading, and then there was a new one in which this revealed reading was rearranged. So we do find this evidence in the case of Ubay ibn Ka'b anhu and Abdullah ibn Masud also, that they might have insisted on the chronological reading, and as a result of which, of course, this does not mean that they did not know there was a final reading, but the fact is that they also transferred this chronological reading to their students, and it was ultimately the students who might have just jumbled up the chronological reading with the new reading, and thereby giving rise to these multiple readings. And of course, the second opinion, or the second reason which Ustaz Ghamidi has given, that it cannot be ruled out that it could have been the forgetfulness of the narrators also, because we do know that this could have taken place, especially when the writing of the manuscript was done in the form that there were no declensions, there were no Arab. Yes, there were dots or diacritics, but that too they were in a scarce way. So this could have also caused some confusion. And finally, we also know that just as many ahadiths were fabricated, And we know that this fabrication took place in the 3rd or 4th centuries. It might well have been that these narratives also consisted of content that relates to these variant readings. So that is what he has said. And then he goes on to actually give us a perspective in history. He says that by the time of the Umayyad dynasty, there were many of them that had risen to surface. And it is said that Abu Ubaid Qasim ibn Salam, he was a prominent authority who died in the 3rd century. He selected 25 of them in his book. So he actually had a number of these readings coming to him of the same verses, and he selected 25 of them in his book. The 7 readings which are famous in current times, we know they were actually chosen and selected by Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid, who passed away in the 4th century. At the end of so thus it is actually generally accepted that their number cannot be ascertained. And then there were people who actually came up with a criteria, with 3 criteria regarding the acceptance of this reading. And these criteria were that number 1, they must have a reliable chain of narration, and of course they should go back to the Prophet himself. Number 2, they must be in the Arabic that has absolutely flawless Arabic. There should be no flaw in the language. And thirdly, they should be compatible with any of the Masahif that were prepared by Usman. So we know that the Usmanic Masahif that he had copied, they had variances. So the standard here says that besides the first 2, that the Arabic should not be flawed, and the fact that the sanad, the reading that is presented, must go back to the Prophet himself. The third criteria of acceptability of a reading is that the codices that were prepared by Usman and dispatched to various parts of his empire, these readings must conform with either of these codices. And so, therefore, any reading that qualifies or that is according to these 3 criteria, then they will be acceptable. Now, there are also people who claim that these readings are mutawatir, or they have a concurrent perpetual chain of narration. But if you look at their chains of narration which are found in books of Qiraat, it leaves absolutely no doubt that they are all ahad. And in case we can also see that they are narrated, reported by narrators that are suspect in the eyes of Rijal authorities. So no scholar can even accept them as hadith, let alone the Quran. So that is how Ustaz Ghamidi has summed up his contention regarding the variant readings. And as I said, his absolute opinion in this regard is that there are no variant readings, and these variant readings have arisen because of either insistence on the chronological reading of the Quran, or forgetfulness of the narrators, or of course fabrication itself. But as far as the Quran is concerned, Al-Qira'atul Amma, which is wrongly dubbed as Qira'atul Hafs, is the only reading that was transmitted as Quran by the Prophet and his companions. So this is a brief answer to his first question. The second question, which says that the meanings of the words that are transmitted from themselves, of the words themselves, they are not definitive because of the fact that these are all ahad, syntax, morphology. We have seen how Imam Razi has actually summed them up. So Ustaz Ghamidi says that the answer to the second question is that the whole argument on the intentionality of the text is dubious. In all living languages, the meanings denoted by words and expressions are all based on perpetuation. They're all mutawatir and are certain in all respects. Morphology and linguistics and other similar disciplines speak of this tawatur. The veracity or mendacity of the narrators and their number has no significance. Words and expressions are called gharib and shaz, which of course means little known. They are not called gharib or shaz because their meaning is little known, but because they are used sparingly. So it does not mean that they are gharib in the sense that their meaning is little known. The thing is that they are used very sparingly because they are little known to those who hear or write them. A word is never isolated from its meaning, so the meaning travels with the word. As long as a word remains in usage, it does so with its meaning. We can be unaware of the meaning of a word and also err in actually determining it, but this cannot be imagined that it is used without being absolutely certain of the meaning it conveys in all or some periods of time. The understanding when a word is used metaphorically and figuratively, or when the same word stands for two different entities, or when it is used as a veiled reference, or when there exists a general connotation and when a specific one, these are all mutawatir. So there is no confusion that wherever this metaphorical or the figurative part of a word is to be used. This is something which is common knowledge, and this is of course common heritage of human beings in every language. So a person may falter in determining whether the word lion has been used literally or figuratively in the sentences. Lion is the king of the forest, and when we compare someone and tell and say that he is a lion, of course, in the first case, when we say that that a lion is the king of the forest, we are referring to the animal. But when we are saying that comparing a person to a lion, then we are using the word lion as a metaphor. It's like a figurative use, and therefore people cannot even err in this matter of understanding. And it is because of this reality of a language that whatever we read and write, we do so with confidence that people will understand the very meaning that we intended to convey. And if for a single instant one comes to know that in documents which are written every day, judgments are pronounced, rulings that are enacted, announcements delivered, and knowledge of disciplines that are communicated, if we think that the intentionality of the text is ambiguous, which means that the words do not convey a definite meaning, and it's like the intentionality of the text is ambiguous, it's not univocal, then everything will become meaningless. So this view is nothing less than skepticism, which according to Ustaz has no place in the world of knowledge. And then Ustaz Ghamidi actually cites Shah Ismail Shahid from his famous book Abaqat, who also has responded to this question. He says that a person who has even the slightest skill of appreciating linguistic styles clearly knows that this viewpoint is based on gross and multiple ignorance, because the meaning for which a word stands for is based on perpetuation. Thus, the question does not even arise for any discussion on the issue of the infallibility of the narrators. And then Ustaz Ghamidi also cites Ibn Qayyim, and who also answers this critique or this viewpoint of him that has been championed by Imam Razi. So he says, those who claim that we have no means to acquire the message of a speaker with full certainty, arguing for this on the basis that the knowledge of what he intends to say is only possible if he first deny 10 facts, are not only muddle themselves but want to muddle others too. If what they claim were true, then the information within the speech of a speaker could never be acquired. Talking would become meaningless, would have been meaningless. Man would have lost his distinctive asset that makes him a human being, and people would have become worse than animals. Even what this writer intends to achieve from this writing could not be identified. Therefore, intellect and sense both suggest that this claim is utterly wrong. There are more than 30 reasons why it is wrong, which have been listed, or which I have listed elsewhere. So basically, Imam Ibn Qayyim has also said this, that along with Shah Ismail Shahid, that this whole point of view that the intentionality of a text is ambiguous, which means the meanings which a text conveys are ambiguous. We are not certain of those meanings, is like skepticism, and in no way can it be accepted. So this sums up Ustaz Ghamidi's answer regarding the second question. Now I'm going to come to the third question, and we will end our talk here on this third question, and inshallah the fourth question, which is regarding hadith, will be discussed in our next sessions. So the third question, if you remember, was the one that we are not able to distinguish between the muhkam and mutashabihat verses of the Quran. So this was how it was presented, that there are two verses of the Quran, and there are two type of verses, two category of verses, and we are not able to distinguish that which ones are muhkam and which ones are mutashabih. So the answer which Ustaz Ghamidi gives, he says that all verses of the Quran on which its guidance is based are muhkam, and mutashabih are only those verses which mention certain blessings and torments a person may encounter in the hereafter, and these are stated through similitudes or similes. So such verses state the attributes and actions of God or mention something which is beyond the grasp of our knowledge and observation, like God blowing his spirit into Adam. I mean, this is something we know the meaning, but we cannot exactly grasp the whole picture how it would happen. So basically, mutashabihat verses are verses in which what's going to happen in the unseen world is compared. It is basically compared with what we know of language in this world. And this is something, of course, which gives us a definite meaning to those verses. But of course, the connotation is something that we will not be able to understand. So when we say that God blew his spirit into Adam, so the words are absolutely clear that he blew his spirit. But what actually happened, or how actually this happened, is something that we would not be knowing at this instant. So similarly, he has given other examples. So one of them is the birth of Jesus. Of course, without a father, or various places and circumstances one may encounter in paradise and hell. All things for which words have not yet been invented can only be stated in the world are, they have to be understood through these comparisons. So, Ustaz Ghamidi then gives an example. He says that to make it even more clear, he says that, for example, 200 years ago, if a person had foreknowledge of electricity bulbs, but at that time they had not been invented. So remember, a person is being supposed, let's say 200 or 300 years previously, or in the past, when of course electricity bulbs had not been invented, but he somehow knew that they would be invented. So how would he conveyed this fact, standing in the past, having knowledge of the future, that electricity bulbs would be invented? So because they had not been invented, there were no words that he could have given. So he would have used the terminology of his own times. So Ustad Ghamidi says that maybe he would have said something like, lanterns which would not require oil or fire will one day light up the world. So he will use the word lanterns because that is the word that they were used to. They didn't know what the electricity bulb was. So they would be using the same word that was in vogue in their own times. So Ustad says that the nature of mutashabih verses is no different. Neither are they unascertainable, nor is there any ambiguity in their meaning. They are set in eloquent Arabic, and we are able to understand their meaning without any difficulty. The only thing is that we are not able to understand what they imply in real life. Since this lack of understanding has nothing to do with the understanding of the Quran, a believer should not get after determining what they imply. So that is what Ustad Ghamidi has said, that as far as the mutashabihat verses are concerned, these are verses in which, of course, the thing that we have to understand is that some future reality that has yet to come to our notice is expressed in a way that we use the current idiom to express a reality that is yet to come into being. So we have to use words and phrases of our times to express something that is yet to be born. So if we look at the Quran also, we see, for example, that people would have deduced the fact that no one can understand the meaning of the mutashabihat verses. The Almighty does not say that no one except him knows the meaning of the mutashabihat verses. So remember, he does not say that no one except him knows the meaning of the mutashabihat verses. On the contrary, what he has said is that no one knows the ta'wil, which means the form and manifestation of what is conveyed by these verses. So the word ta'wil is something very meaningful. And we do remember the dream of Prophet Joseph, in which he dreamt that 11 stars and the sun and the moon were prostrating before him. Of course, when the interpretation of this dream came to his knowledge, he said that, Father, this is the meaning of my dream I saw earlier, and my Lord has made it a reality. So he said, وَقَالَ يَا أَبَتْ هَذَا تَأْوِيلُ رُؤْيَايَ. So this is the ta'wil of the ru'ya. So the word ta'wil has been used, which means that the reality of something is only known to God, not the meaning. Meaning would be known to everyone, but how that is going to happen is the knowledge of God only. So this has been expressed in the Quran, and of course, the verse of the Quran that is under discussion is something that I would now like to quote, because this is the verse that actually sums up or tells us that the Quran has muhkam and mutashabihat verses. It says, هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب وأخر متشابهات فأما الذين في قلوبهم زيغ فيتبعون ما تشابه منه ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله وما يعلم تأويله إلا الله والراسخون في العلم يقولون آمنا به كل من عند ربنا وما يذكر إلا أولو الألباب. It is He who has revealed to you the book. Some of its verses are muhkam, they are the foundation of the book, and besides them others that are mutashabih. Then those whose hearts are warped go after the mutashabih among them in order to create dissension and in order to know their reality, even though no one except God knows their reality. On the contrary, those who are well grounded in knowledge say, we believe in them, all this has come from our Lord, and in reality only men of intellect understand such things. So basically what has to be understood is that as far as the Quran is concerned, the muhkam and mutashabih verses, they do not cause any ambiguity, they do not undermine the status of the Quran as the Meezan or as the final authority, because it is not true to say that we cannot identify the muhkam and the mutashabih verses, and people have differed in that. Ustaz says that it is right through the word mutashabih that we can know that mutashabih actually means that we are comparing some reality that we are yet to encounter in words that we are using today. So we absolutely know that these are the verses who are mutashabih, that in these verses a comparison is being made of some unknown reality or some unknown fact using words of today. And the meaning, of course, is something we know very well know when it is said that, for example, that God blew his spirit into Adam. I mean, the sentence is clear, but how this actually took place and what was the mechanism, that is something about which God says that only He knows the reality. So it should not be translated that the mutashabih verses are known only to God or their meaning is known only to God. That would be a wrong translation. The correct translation would be that their reality, how the things would take place the way they are described, is known only to God. So this brings us to an end to his answer on this third question also, that the muhkam and mutashabih verses, the way they are presented in the Quran, they in no way infringe on the fact that the Quran can not be regarded as the final authority. Yes, it can be, because we know what the muhkam and mutashabih are. And also, to sum up our today's discussion, earlier on we have just seen that the variant readings also, they do not in any way undermine the authority of the Quran, because there are in fact no variant readings. There is only just one reading of the Quran. Those variant readings which do exist, we know that they have come into existence either through fabrication or through forgetfulness of the memorizers, or of course, which is a more likely and a more dominant reason, I would say, because of the insistence of people to stick to the chronological reading of the Quran. And we've also seen that the intentionality of the text of the Quran being ambiguous is another thing that has been negated by Ustaz, and through Ibn Qayyim and Shah Ismail's excerpts, he has shown that scholars like these two, they also regard this to be sheer skepticism. Everyone knows the meaning, what a word conveys, and a very large part of the language is transmitted through tawatur, which is perpetual concurrence, and a word is not transmitted in space without association to its meaning. So words travel, I mean the meanings travel with the words, and hence this cannot be accepted. So I end my talk here of these three issues, and inshallah in our next session we'll take up the fourth objection that has arisen on Ustaz Ghamidi's view, or can be arisen, that how can we accept certain ahadith of the Prophet which go against the Quran, and if we have to accept the Quran, then we'll have to negate these narratives which are very sound in their origin. So if you have any questions regarding today's discussion, please raise them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our first question of the day asks, the various delicacies and intricacies and subtleties of the Arabic language, and that too of the era when the Quran was being revealed, no doubt are of great interest and concern for the non-Arabic people, and we need to learn all that, but the Arabic speaking people have no such restrictions. And we still see that a lot of old exegesis like the Quran, like Tafsir ibn Kathir, heavily rely on historical traditions and hadith instead of focusing on the meaning of the word of the Quran itself and the context. What are the reasons?
The reason is something that we have discussed on many occasions, is that you see the towering personality of the Prophet. It took time for people to digest the fact that what has been conveyed from him could have been a misunderstanding of the narrators. So you see, if you go back in history, for example, you're standing in a time when the Prophet had just passed away, and maybe 100 years or so had passed, and your grandfather or maybe your great grandfather was there in the time of the Prophet, and there was this tradition traveling down in the family which says that, well, he heard the Prophet say this. So as soon as person would, or people would think that the Prophet has said something about the Quran, the fact that he was just 100 years ago that he existed, and he said something to your grandfather, your great grandfather, and that thing traveled right up to you, there would be very little chance for you to not accept that, because this is how people do. Yes, this is something that of a leverage that you can give people, but the fact is that the mechanism of this transmission had to be analyzed at that time, because the grandfather or the great grandfather, whatever he heard, was in isolation, just one person telling something to his son and then to his son. And then the sons themselves, we are not sure whether they understood correctly or properly, because, of course, in spite of being very knowledgeable, a person cannot be always perfect. He could have a flawed understanding. So, the nature of transmission of prophetic knowledge through isolate reports in the first era, which was very close to the Prophet's era, made people actually oblivious of the fact that they should understand the text first and then see whether the explanation of the Prophet actually does justice to the text or not. So this somehow never took place. And then I think another very important thing that was also came into play was the opinion of Imam Shafi, one of the greatest authorities of fiqh, also jurisprudence, and also on the Quran. His book, of course, Risala, which is called Risala, is the first book of Usul al-Fiqh, in which he laid down this proposition that all ahadiths of the Prophet, they cannot be false if they are rightly reported. They cannot be in any sense against the Quran. And if we think that they are against the Quran, then it is because of the fact that our knowledge is flawed. So the Prophet would not have said something against the Quran. So the flaw here, to me, it seems, is the fact that yes, of course, the Prophet would not say something against the Quran, but then we have to ascertain whether the Prophet actually said that or not, and that ascertainment can only be done through a critical analysis of the transmission of that narrative. This is something that actually seldom took place, or if ever it did take place, a lot of leverage was given to hadith, in the sense that when they were not confining, or they were not making any sense, or they were at variance with the Quran, then they were still accepted, again thinking that maybe we are not understanding the Quran properly, but this narrative, with whatever it's telling, must be the true interpretation of what the Quran is conveying. So these are the two causes, I would say, that actually set apart the whole understanding procedure of the Quran right after 150 years of the Prophet's demise. And when this took place, it seems that it went on and on. Yes, interspersed between these eras were people who did rise and say that we have to understand the Quran directly from the text and not from the Prophet's knowledge, not because we deny the knowledge of the Prophet, but because the nature of that transmission of prophetic knowledge could be flawed. So we have to consider and critically evaluate it. So it was only, I would say, many centuries ago, in fact, the last century, when Ustaz Amiruddin Farahi, he put his foot down and said that, well, if this is something that is that we have to accept, that the Quran rules and it dominates and it has the final word, then we must actually apply this as well. And the Quran must be understood from the text, from its language, from the structure of the Quran itself, and then any extraneous understanding should be evaluated on what we directly understand from the Quran. So this was like a totally reversal of understanding. So in other words, our ancient scholars, we can say, if I sum up their approach, it would be that the Quran must be understood through hadith. Ustaz Farahi actually reversed it. He said, no, hadith has to be understood from the Quran because the Quran has a definite context, we know, and a hadith, of course, we don't know because of the fact that various people are transmitting the same incident, with some of them with sparse details, some of them with more details, and then, of course, some of them in a way that might be at variance. So we have to make a complete picture, and this picture at times still would be flawed if we collect all the variant texts. So it has to be understood in the light of the Quran, every hadith. So it was like a reversal of understanding, and I mean, this has been going on in the last 100 years through his successors like Ustaz Islahi and then Ustaz Ghamidi, and then of course in the 4th years, many of the students of these scholars. So, but before that, you'll not find consistently people who expound the fact that the Quran is the final word, and then still stick to this assertion. I mean, they would be very far and few between.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Ruhi Rasul, please go ahead.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Sahab. This is Wahid's son. I have a question regarding today's topic. Dr. Sahab, there is this some European Quranic scholar that I was listening to very recently talking about this very topic, about this Muslim Ummah's view on how the Quran's present form was collected during Hazrat Usman's period. And he had a very interesting point to make, and he said that if the Muslims had to make this up, then they would probably make up a better story, because this tale or this story leaves so many doubts in the veracity of the collection. So it must be true. That's why they believe it. Otherwise, they would make up a better story of Quran's collection. Well, putting this argument aside, sir, I have thought about this subject a lot, and to my mind, the verse that has been quoted in the argument by Ghamidi Saab, where the Quran says that it is our responsibility and it is up to us to collect it and to safeguard it, and so the Prophet should not worry so much regarding this. Sir, I don't see a contradiction between that verse and the possibility, no matter how rare it might be, of what Muslims believe happened during Hazrat Usman's era, because God could use Hazrat Usman and his whatever he attempt he made to then protect the Quran and to put it in the form that we get it today. So it's not necessary that the verse that is quoted, that it is God who will protect it and assemble it, and then Hazrat Usman actually doing it in his era. It doesn't necessarily have to be a contradiction. How do you see that, and how do you
Yes,
answer?
I agree with that. It does not have to be a contradiction. It could be perfectly explained. But what we are actually criticizing is an interpretation of this Usmanic narrative, which means that he recollected the Quran. So remember, if you look at the Usmanic collection, it's not just a simple case of copying it out from Hafsa's manuscript. That is one version. Another version is that he started to collect the Quran afresh, and then again he could not find the one of the verses of the Quran, and then there's a whole bunch of things that that the narrative says. So what we are criticizing, or what Ustaz has done in the past regarding the Usmanic narrative or its collection, is the conventional understanding of this narrative. He has actually sort of represented his understanding, and that he says that all that Usman did was just to, as the Caliph, as the leader of the Muslims, all that he did was he just disseminated the Quran to the various parts of his empire. Of course, it was a growing empire. A lot of conquests had been done. So what the narrative tells us is a different picture. But what we can dilute out from the narrative and from some other historical information also is that the best thing, or the most something that can be derived from all this historical evidence, is that he just distributed many copies of the Quran to the vast empire that at that time came to be under his supervision. And that is something which, as a responsibility, any person would do who assumes the charge of Muslim affairs. So this is like his interpretation, and as you said, that it's not necessarily to be against what the Quran has said and it's about its own self. It's not. It's just the understanding of that Usmanic narrative, which our conventional scholars make, that creates that problem. And if you'd like more details, then I have discussed this narrative in my book, Critical Study of the Quran, Critical Study of the History of the Quran, and shown that how this narrative creates a lot of problems if it is accepted on its face value.
And sir, what do you have to say about the very interesting point that this non-Muslim Quranic scholar, European scholar, makes, that this is such an incredible, unbelievable story about the collection of the Quran, of the early manuscripts, that
I think he could be right, but the thing is that the fact that they have not made it up is one thing, and the fact that they have totally jumbled it and mixed it up is another thing. So yes, we would agree that it's not being made up, but misunderstanding or misstatement of facts, not purposefully, but I mean, every person can falter in spite of being very sincere. So a sincere lack of understanding, I would say, or a sincere lack of statement of the correct facts could also be the same thing. I mean, yes, the story would not have been made up. I agree with that. But whatever was actually transmitted also is something that is very unlikely. And the two things are not mutually exclusive.
And Dr. very quickly, if I can ask, and I do not have this information, do the because the my understanding is that the Shia Muslims also agree that this is the they read the same Quran, and there are no differences between Kirat or between sort of like the flow of surahs. So what is their origin story? I'm very sure that they do not agree that it was assembled during Hazrat Usman's period. So what do you
I
have
think I would
knowledge?
advise you to look up my book, because this is a detailed topic. And I've discussed the collection that is ascribed to Ali Rizala Anhu. And the Sunni sources have a different version, the Shia sources have a different version, and it's better if you look it up.
All right, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our next question asks, how can we weed out the flawed hadiths and keep the meaningful ones?
It's not the responsibility of a common Muslim to do so. So this work has already been done by scholars. So they just need to rely on a collection that to them seems to be reliable. So this collection of the critical evaluation of the of hadith literature is the job of the scholars of hadith, the muhaddisun. And so a common person should just read those ahadiths that they have collected, and if they find something that they do not make sense of or cannot make sense of, they can of course discuss with some scholar or with some authority. But in no way are they equipped to critically evaluate hadith literature, because it's a very highly specialized science, and it takes years and years of hard work to actually master it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, Hadith Kissa appears to contradict the Qur'an because Qur'an in Surah Ahzab explicitly talks about wives of the Prophet, while Hadith specifies it to Ali, Fatima, Hassan, and Hussein. How do we reconcile between the two?
So I think that because this topic is going to come up in our next session, reconciliation of hadith with the Quran, that's a whole big topic that we are going to take up in our very next session, because this is one of the objections that have been raised against the authority of the Quran, that the hadiths, they are at variance with the Quran. So I would request the questioner to please wait for the next session, because this topic would be comprehensively taken up.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 138. They're asking for the explanation of the translations. Do you want me to read out the ayah?
Yes, I mean, it's not related to our today's topic, is it? Or we are having off-topic questions?
Honestly, it's in Urdu, so I can't really. I don't know if it's related to topic or not, because I haven't translated it. Translated the tarjuma. So
Okay.
I think You know what? We'll leave this for tomorrow. So I'll request the participant to please ask this question tomorrow by the end of tomorrow's session. The next question asks, is there any author besides Ibn Kathir that we can read?
Well, there are several authors. Ibn Kathir is just an 8th century, very competent exegete of the Quran. So it depends on how you would like to read the Quran. So one way to read the Quran is by a comparative study of the various currents of Mufassirun. So Ibn Kathir presents is one of the best exponents of the traditional interpretation, traditional approach of interpretation in which the Quran is understood through Hadith. So I think if the questioner would like to have a comparative understanding of these tafsir schools, I would suggest that 3 schools or 3 people could be selected because each of them represent their own school. So one of them would be Ibn Kathir, the other would be Abul Ala Maududi, and the third would be Ustaz Amin Ahsan Islahi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. And the book that you recommended, was that the critical study of Hadith literature?
I don't recall which book I recommended.
Or the critical analysis of the Qur'an? Was it that one? For the first question.
What was could you remind me of the first question? Which
Sorry,
exactly?
Rasul's question about a hadith related in the Qur'an.
Dr. Sahab, I asked about whether the Shia believe in the same
Yes,
source story, and you said
I
I should
remember. So
refer
that is
to
called
one book.
History of the Quran, a critical study.
History of Quran, yeah.
A critical study, so yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Last
much.
call for any more questions? Okay, we don't seem to have any more topic related questions. So I think with the last few minutes, we can take that one non-topic question. They're asking for the translation of this ayah that says, صبغة الله ومن أحسن من الله صبغة.
نحن له عابدون.
Yes.
I mean, I don't understand why they are asking a translation from me. All famous scholars have translated this verse. I think if there is a question regarding any translation, that would be a more appropriate question to ask. Otherwise, they can just pick up any translation and see how it has been translated. I mean, if there is a problem in the translation, because this translation you can just type the verse and you'll get it on your screen. It's a very simple verse. So if there is a problem in understanding the verse, of course, I can try my best to answer that question. Otherwise, I mean, this verse just needs to be the translation just needs to be read.
Very much. He's asking, Allah ka rang se kya murad hai?
The color of God refers to the fact, is actually a metaphorical allusion to the fact that He is one. It's referring to the fact that God is one. There's no other God, and that is what is being said. That adopt the color of God. Sibghatullah, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ مِنَ اللَّهِ sibgha, and who is better than to adopt the word of the color of God. So sibgha actually means the color, and here it refers to His attribute of being one.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all the questions today. Thank you for another wonderful session, and thanks to all the participants for coming, joining us, and asking your questions. Inshallah, we'll see you all tomorrow in another session of textual study of the Quran. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.